Hi, everyone. Thanks for logging on. I can see that there's quite a few people who are still signing in, but just to let you know we're here, we'll get started in just a moment. Okay, I'm gonna start talking. The numbers are starting to level off just a little bit. So hi, everyone. Welcome back to those of you who were with us last week. For those of us who are new, my name is Haley Ross, and I work with the Columbia Mountains Institute, or CMI for short. And I'm joined here today with Kendall Benesh with the Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. CMI and KCP have joined forces again to present the 8th season of CMI's Cred Talks, the Columbia Region Ecological Discussion, and KCP's 10th Winter Webinar Series. Now, before I really get started, I'd just like to pause briefly, and we want to acknowledge that the region that both of our organizations work are in the unceded homeland of the Sinixt, the Shuswap, the Ktunaxa, and the Syilx peoples, who have stewarded and cared for this land, water, and all living things since time immemorial. And as with our past webinars, I'd like to invite you all to introduce yourself via the chat, and please feel free to include the Indigenous territories that you're zooming in from today. And as those start to roll in, I'll just tell you a little bit about the webinar series. So this season of webinars will explore the theme of wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity. We're welcoming 8 speakers who will discuss this theme from different perspectives and provide a wide view that can inform conservation of connected and resilient landscapes in the Columbia Basin. This year's series is financially supported by the Columbia Basin Trust and by LGL Limited. Big thanks to both of those organizations for ensuring that we can offer this series free of charge. And thanks for tuning in to Talk 2 of the series, where landscape architect Leslie Lowe will present ideas for what can be done on a site scale for enhancing wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity. Leslie will provide an update on the status of the Columbia Valley Wildlife Management Area restoration site and specific examples of results observed for target species such as the northern leopard frog and bobolink, as well as significant strides that have been made in the implementation of the master plan. Thanks for those of you who have started introducing yourselves. As those introductions continue to roll in, I'm just going to speak briefly about who CMI is. So CMI is a nonprofit society and an association for people working in the various fields of ecology. We provide professional development opportunities in the form of conferences, courses, webinars, of course, that address everything from skill-based research techniques to land management conundrums. Our website is the best place to learn more about us or to connect with me individually via email or phone anytime. And the website contains really great resources, including recordings from all of our major talks and proceeding documents. There's lots of fun resources on there at cmiae.org. So at this point, I'd just like to pass it over to Kendall.
Thanks, Haley. My name's Kendall Benesh, and I'm joining you on behalf of Kootenai Conservation Program, or KCP. KCP is a diverse network of more than 85 land and water conservation and stewardship groups, federal, provincial, and local governments, First Nations, land trusts, agricultural producers, and educational institutions who all contribute to conserving our region. The purpose of KCP's partnership is to cooperatively conserve and steward landscapes that sustain biodiversity and naturally functioning ecosystems, and to generate the support and resources needed to advance this effort, including building technical knowledge in webinars like this. We're very excited to be hosting the webinar series again this year with CMI, and would like to give an additional thanks to all of our program sponsors, without whom we would not be able to support this type of work. Just a couple of housekeeping details from me, and then we'll get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted within a week to both CMI's event webpage and KCP's Winter Webinar Series webpage. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar to add a question to the queue, and we'll do our best to make our way through them. You can also utilize the upvote button in the Q&A. So if you have a question that's similar to yours or that you'd also like answered, please press the thumbs up icon by that question. Back to you, Haley.
Great. Thanks, Kendall. All right, so now the reason that you're all here today, I have the honor of introducing Leslie Lowe, who will be presenting on wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity from the perspective of a landscape architect. I just have a short bio that I would like to read. So Leslie is a landscape designer and owner of Beargrass Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning. Leslie is an informed, dynamic, engaged, and an integrated approach to any particular project that has excellent experience working in nonprofit societies and coordinating with their respective governments and stakeholders. Leslie has worked in landscape architecture in Canada and the US since 2008, and she became a licensed landscape architect in Montana, Connecticut, and British Columbia in 2011. She has a Master of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning from the Utah State University. So Leslie, I'll pass it over to you. You can take over the screen.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. Well, welcome from today. I'm in Montana, but I have kind of jumped across the border throughout my life. Growing up in Alberta, being in the West Kootenays of Slocan Valley, the Arrow Lakes area, going on to high school in Argenta on the north end of the lake. So it's my stomping grounds. I'm just trying to figure here. Hold on a second as we make sure that the slideshow is advancing. There we go. There we go. So this, and finally on to Selkirk College and then to Utah State in environmental planning. And I was kind of lucky because I had enough background in wildlife biology, forestry through various programs that I could continue that is in my master's program and probably have as many environmental program classes as I did landscape architecture. So I really can blend these areas and really the transboundary area is my home stomping ground. So enough of that. We're going to talk about the duck lake nesting area in the frog bear corridor. And big thanks to Marc-André Beaucher and Julia Schwan for kind of spearheading this project with the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area. And it started in 2020 where they wanted to look at getting funding through Climate Change Canada to look at a master plan for the duck lake nesting area adjacent to the frog bear. So a little bit about the objectives, and I was brought on board to help create a master plan. So if we're looking at the big map of it, Creston, and just north of it on the, really on the south end of Kootenay Lake is Duck Lake, and a portion of the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area. And if we jump in here, this is, numerous organizations own part of it or help manage part of it. So Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area is the primary, but there's a Duck Lake Covenant, which is this pink area, and that is called the West and the Yellow, and that's part of the West Meadows Farm and is an active working farm that is leased by Creston Valley. So next slide here. So who am I? I already kind of mentioned that. What skills I bring to the project, the ability to work with various biologists, shareholders, and really to come up with a master plan. And that is what we're showing today. So here's a couple examples of what the land looks like. And so it really is a blend of agricultural fields, riparian corridors, black cottonwood, dogwood, and then it's also got a lot of dikes and a lot of roads. So one of the first things when I look at that master plan, when I start to create it is I really am trying to create a brochure, a pamphlet that gives us, for Creston Valley Wildlife Management area, a toolbox that they can look at when they start making their design decisions about this property. And so what this is really just a document that helps them through those steps. So the first thing is defining what patches are, what corridors are, and there's some examples here on the right-hand side of the screen from USDA conservation corridor planning. Now these are very linear examples, and if we look up top to the colorful one by Parks Canada, we still see those same elements. We're just seeing it in a little bit more natural way because we've got topography. But the one thing about this Duck Lake Frog Bear corridor is that it actually does really fit that USDA conservation corridor planning linear look because of the dams and because of the agricultural fields and also because of the roads and the river and the drainage ditches. So it is a very linear corridor. So areas, again, these are just kind of pretty basic terms of sinks, of where area wildlife move in, where sources, where wildlife move out. And really the big thing here is the barriers. What intercepts, what stops wildlife from moving? And we looked at Michael's slides the other day, Michael Proctor's on the boundary project. And we really saw that grizzly bears and Diane Boyd in Montana with her Wolf project, we're seeing movement all through the Rockies, all across, through Creston to the Purcells, all up through the Columbia Valley. And these linkages at times break down. And part of it is because of agricultural field. Part of it is just, we've got roads, we've got dams, we've got agricultural fields, we've got towns. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we look at fragmentation. And if we can look at areas that are fragmented and try to find a linkage for them, then that really helps us, really helps stopping this fragmentation from happening. And in the bottom part of that slide, you can see that there's a riparian corridor, some of its patches, and it's pretty difficult for wildlife to move between them, whereas there's an intact, unfragmented patch, and we've got good corridor movement, wildlife movement. So again, the same thing when we look at Parks Canada versus some of the USDA, which is up top. But really, they're showing us the same. We're looking at ecology corridors, connectivity, and the map is really interesting, I think, from Parks Canada when we're looking at connectivity as the measurement of the probability of movement. So if we can increase that probability of movement, we're making a big difference. So fragmented matrix, that's really is what we're looking at on this particular property. We've got fragmented patches, we've got barriers, roads, dikes, we've got agricultural fields, channelized drainage ditch, and fragments of cottonwood forest and riparian edge. Now, those areas are pretty interesting because the cottonwoods have tons of biodiversity, but if we can't move from there to drainage ditches or riparian, then we ended up with this fragmented matrix. So here's a big picture of what we have. And I think I can zoom in here, so let me do that. So in this part of it, we're looking at bobolink habitat. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And it's an upland area, right adjacent to riparian. But we also have a road here, which is linear matrix, linear corridor. Fragmented dogwood, riparian edge here. Now we do have a lot of cattle that go in here. So that is one of the things that we really had to look at it on this project is, where do we keep agriculture, what benefits the most for wildlife. Farmland, here we've got the steep channelized drainage ditches, the fragmented forest. So when we look at key elements, then drainage ditches, we just talked about it here, and you can see them in this upper picture where they're just really steep banks, and the cattle actually go into it. They're linear corridors. We've got areas on the bottom slide of the black cottonwood forest. They've been overgrazed. The level of the water keeps changing because of the channelization. So it isn't the tip of what we want to see in a cottonwood forest. There's virtually no understory. And it's a great area that if we can reclaim that or at least improve it, then we make a big difference. The other area is the riparian edges. So we've got a mix of that going from, if I go back a couple of steps here, you know, we have these channelized drainage, but we've got this huge wetland right here. So, but then it's separated. There's a big dike that separates this from the agricultural field. So these riparian edges, you know, they're kind of stopped by this dike. So when we started to look at this, it was like, well, what species are the most important to us? What species should we be looking at that we can actually do something to improve? And 2004, there was a study here, and they came up with a much larger targeted list of species that are in that area or might benefit. Well, we looked at it and we really broke it down to a much smaller list where we said, well, these are the important species that are already on the project, on this property, and we think that we can increase the connectivity between their habitats. And connectivity is an interesting thing because we're looking at it from very large scale with the grizzly bear habitat. And Michael talked about this before, but also all the way down to, you know, northern leopard frogs. So the scale of connectivity really changes, the scale of, you know, their home territory. But at the same time, we can look at this project and go, well, on all these different levels, how can we improve it? And can we improve it for multiple species? So one of the first things I did was start to kind of do a literature review of the species. What are they saying there? What are their habitats requirements? What are the missing ingredients? And what conflicts do we have? So I've summarized, from the report, these species, and just try to kind of condense what we know about them. So bobolinks needing native cropland, but they don't like woody vegetation. And so they don't really want that shrub. They want dense and moderate vegetation. And that means that areas adjacent to the riparian corridor, we really don't want to mow, because that's really affecting those bobolinks, especially during June through August. And it also affects the cattle going into that area, because if I bring cattle in during June through August, then I reduce my breeding. So grizzly bears, same thing, we're looking at a lot of disturbance, broken linkages because of urban utility corridors, recreation, settlement, transportation, resource extraction. And so is there a way to provide them a safe corridor that gives them some better linkage from the South Selkirk grizzly bear area to the Purcell Mountains? So again, very different scale, but they show some similarities in habitat needs. Kept doing it, from looking through all of the different wildlife, from the little brown to the myotis to the northern leopard frog. Some of these wildlife, they won't be there in winter, or they migrate through, or for one reason or another, like the little brown myotis, I mean, it just won't winter over unless you do some human-made structures that we can control temperature and humidity. Northern leopard frog, one of the issues is the vegetation next to the ditches. So it'll move into the ditches, but then we start to have a problem with the agricultural fields next door. And whether it's the cattle, whether it's crop production. So again, it's another corridor that we're identifying that we're missing. Western painted turtle kind of conflicts a little bit with the northern leopard frog. The northern leopard frog is the species that we're really concerned about in that area. Short-eared owl. And again, it's uplands, dry marshes, concealed grasses, and forbs. Unbrowsed snowberry with an understory of forb. So quite different than the bobolink. Two very different needs, but habitats that we can accommodate on this project. Western screech owl and black cottonwood area. So again, is that an area that we can improve? Yellow chat, protect the understories and shrub communities. And, reduce agricultural pesticide applications. So when we look at it from a vegetative design, then what can we do to increase that diversity? I'm just catching up here. And really, we want a diversity of flowering plants, including berries, grasses, tubers. We need to do more inventory of undisturbed upland and riparian corridors to make sure that we're seeing all of the plants that should be there, as well as the plants that will come in if we work on those corridors. So some of the plants that we're interested in bringing, increasing in density: river birch, black hawthorn, black cottonwood, red ossie or dogwood, willows, snowberries, roses, saskatoons, hazelnut, buffalo berries, snowberry, grasses, sedges, fireweed, horsetails, cow parsnip, peavine, kinnikinnick, and sweet vetch. And as we talked about it on the earlier slides, like the bobolink, they really want an improved upland area. But then we have other species, including grizzlies, that want food crops, willows, different tubers. And the other part of it too is that we have a tendency to get rid of our woody debris and standing trees and decaying organic matter, but that all provides good habitat. And it might not be direct habitat for these species, but it improves the insects in that area. And the insects then become the food source. It's a very flat, it's either flat from the ag fields or it's ditches and drainage ditches and not very many organic undulating terrain. So that's one of the things that we wanted to look at, whether we can increase it. And when we started to look at then what kind of plants we bring in, we have several choices kind of in how we get our plants. We can contract grow, and Creston has great nurseries and probably lots of people that would be interested in helping on that. Custom seed mixes bring affordability, live staking, clones, and seedlings. And I'm just going to zoom in here. Here's an image that my sister drew. She's a botanical illustrator and rare plant botanist. So a good example of some of the things that we can do in those cottonwood areas that will increase plant diversity and better plant survival. And one of the huge components with every project, excuse me, is invasive seeds, invasive species. So we're really lucky because we have Central Kootenai Invasive Species Society. They can work directly with Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area. They have in the past, and they will continue to do so. The big thing is limiting disturbance, or if I make a disturbance, can I reseed it or mulch it immediately? And making sure that my contractors, when they bring equipment in, that those are seed-free, weed-free. Because a lot of times that equipment will come from an area, even with knapweed, and they bring it into an area that now we're trying to create new wetlands or change the bank structure, and we're just spreading that seed. So the big key thing here is early detection and control. And we need temporary fencing because elk, wildlife in general, you know, they get the tasty, fresh, brand new plant material. And especially when it comes out of a nursery, they've often been using fertilizers on it. And that plant is super sweet. So the impact on that plant from foraging in that first year is tremendously high. So if we can put temporary fencing at least to get those plants started, it allows the biomass of that plant, you know, to be growing, to the root structure to develop, so that by the second year and future years, they're able to withstand that grazing a little bit better. And most of our native plants are genetically designed to be grazed. So they, you know, they might lose stuff on the surface, but what's growing beneath the soil is also key. So agricultural considerations. Let me just catch up here. So West Meadows Farm is a good chunk of this property. It is leased. They lease it from Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area. So the farm itself obviously wants to be productive. And they are actually working with Farmland Advantage to create a riparian management and a more comprehensive management program. At the same time, Creston Valley Management Area they're trying to manage their lands for wildlife. And at the same time, maintain agricultural sustainability. So I would say it's not a conflict, it's an opportunity to strengthen the power of conservation and ranching partnerships. Some of the things then that we looked at on the master plan is minimizing the loss of land for grazing, enhance the quality of the range, provide thermal cover for cattle outside of the riparian areas, and clearly define wildlife buffers cordoned off by wildlife-friendly fencing. So part of that, then when we look at it like the bobolink area, when the cattle come in during the breeding season, or we graze or mow, burn, we reduce the bobolink population. So that's just a key area that we need to restrict the bobolink from. Another major area is the actual drainage ditches. So the drainage channels right now are really steep. We've got ag crops on both sides of them and steep sides. The cattle go into them, they break down the sides of the bank. We have very little vegetation there. So what we want to do is create an upland and a forested buffer. So put in a fence that stops the cattle from going into those drainage ditches that we're now trying to call a riparian corridor. We'll change the shape of the riparian corridor, put in a forested buffer and an upland buffer. So that gives us the ability for to create that corridor, those linkages for the wildlife, without being so impacted by the agriculture. Other ways that we can help increase the connectivity as well as benefit the agriculture areas is buffer strips for pollinators. And I think everybody's seen this as in agriculture, a lot of times we're putting in these buffer strips with pollinator plants, and as soon as we increase the pollinators, we're actually getting better quality crops. Wildlife fencing. Now, when I do these master plans, it's a guiding document. So that means that it's perfectly open for changes on the ground. It just gives them a kind of a good overview of the steps needed to be taken. So in this one, I show a wildlife-friendly fence with smooth wire and a PVC cover on the top rail. And in fact, what they've chosen to do is put in electric fencing. Some of the areas, again, this really benefits the smaller amphibians, is putting amphibian tunnels in areas that are compacted or that gets heavy agricultural traffic. And since we're trying to move the cattle out of the riparian corridors, it's really important then to make sure that they have thermal cover and water holes and water troughs. There actually is quite a few studies that show that cattle will prefer a water trough in comparison to a drainage ditch. So we want to make that move to benefit the cattle as well benefit the wildlife. So what does our master plan look like? And again, we're kind of taking a broad scale approach here. We're identifying the areas that we think we could make some recommendations that will benefit multiple species and give Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area really a toolbox to use for the future. So zoom in a little bit here. So some of it happens we can identify the farm access road, proposed wildlife corridors, proposed wildlife ponds, terrain modification, wildlife fencing, and bobolink area. So the bobolink area is on the top left part of your screen. The orange line is wildlife fencing. And you can notice that what we did is we moved it away from the, we've created that buffer, wildlife buffer, with increasing the linkages with it between the cottonwood forest, adding additional trees, moving that fence line away so that the cattle aren't in it, and adding some additional ponds for leopard, frog, and wetland species on the top right hand corner. And that whole little triangle used to also have the cattle in it. So again, it's setting up that fence line. So some of the updates in 2021, it was our first year. And the big thing was getting my master planning on board and starting to write that report. And for on the ground work was changing the Duck Lake water control. And here's an example. They had an existing pump house that they removed, and they replaced it with sluice gates so that they could actually control the water going into Duck Lake. In 2022, they wanted to really improve the northern leopard frog migrating between the overwintering and breeding habitats. And that was the start of the creating 3 new wetlands on that right-hand side of the project. Native seeding, planting, invasive plant management. Here we can see that they're building the new wetlands. Sorry, I got ahead on my slides there. There's the sluice gate and the pump house. So 2022, building wetlands. You can see the wetlands in this top corner, turtle nesting mounds, ditch filled. So they worked also on changing the shape of the drainage ditches so that we had better corridors, better movement, more wetland species could move through those areas instead of being having it as a barrier. In 2023, they kept working on the wetland creation. They did more fencing to protect areas all along the riparian corridor and recontouring drainage ditches. So here again, we can see the start of the channel construction. And originally those were very steep, consistent drainage ditches. And they've since put some meanders into them, as well as increasing, you know, the cottonwood buffers and increasing the buffer along the sides of them. This area on the bottom left-hand side is next to the bobolink area on the northwest part of the project. And they've kept putting a new exclusion fence for the cattle to keep them out of that wetland pool. So that is kind of a recap of what we've done. The benefits of working with a landscape architect on a project like this is really I'm there to help the biologists, the landowners, the nonprofits, ecologists to create that multi-species plan. And I can help with the graphics and creating that master plan and really a framework to organize the project. And as I said, I'm trying to give them a toolbox of ideas, of ways to modify their landscape to benefit wildlife. But at the same time, we always have the human interface. And in this case, we have lots of dog walkers that use the dike. And so when we have that, we start having a little conflict with the wildlife, the human-wildlife interface, right? So that buffer will create that safe habitat for the wildlife, or that's our intention. Now, how do we keep the people out of that? And part of it really comes down to good interpretive and directional signage. And I think people are really interested in hearing about new projects, about protecting for wildlife. And if they have that understanding through interpretive signs, then they're much more likely to go, okay, I'll stick on the dike trails or I'll stick on the roads. And hopefully I'll be able to look over and get glimpses of more wildlife moving through. So that's kind of the next step that I think Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area will, as they continue to work on the buffers and channels, they'll also get this interpretive signage up. And after that, I'm open for questions. I hope you enjoyed our presentation. And my email's on the bottom of this slide if anybody has additional questions. And I will now turn it back to stop my screen share and turn it back to our moderators. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. You can actually, oh, sure. You can leave that slide up, or I'll put mine up if that's what we're going to do. Hi, everyone. So what we're going to do now is move into some questions. I'm just multitasking here, pulling up the Q&A slide. There we go. We have the Q&A function going. And so what I'd like you to do, if possible, is redirect any questions that you may have put in the chat into that Q&A. If you see a question in the Q&A that you'd like to have answered, there is that thumbs up function, and it'll order it in priority sequence there, or in popularity, so to speak. And I know that we missed the upvoting in the last webinar. I'm not sure if anyone noticed that. It was just a new technical feature that not all of our team was familiar with, but so we'll do our best to follow the upvoting this time. And I also want to mention that spur of the moment, I know that Marc-André Beaucher, who's been highly involved and continues to be highly involved in this project, was in attendance, and I've just promoted him to panelist. So he's behind the scenes now too. If anyone else has questions and would like to direct them to Marc-André, we'll do that, and Leslie can bounce some stuff. Anyway, he and Leslie can bounce some stuff around, and I know Marc-André might actually have a question for Leslie himself. So why don't I just get started with the first question from Luke, and we'll go from there. So Luke says, being that it is next to open farmland, is there an issue with nutrient and fertilizer-rich water runoff and leaching from agricultural lands and cattle operations?
For sure. And that's really why we tried to create that buffer, so that we're creating both an upland and a forested buffer between the agriculture and the riparian, so that we can start to contain that or trap that. And I think the Farmland Advantages program is probably also working with them to make sure that they're in the most ecological manner of farming that they can. So we appreciate that. Marc-André, do you have anything more on that?
I could just say, yeah, the sort of the operation is not maybe intense as they are in some other areas, and there are always risk of pesticides and herbicides leaching into the wetland. But yeah, with creating like more plants to absorb some of these I guess nutrients or whatever chemicals, it reduces, the amount that reaches the water or the wetland. And part of the fencing that we did too was to keep the cattle out of those sensitive areas. So, we're trying to balance a bit being compatible with agriculture and, improve habitat conditions for wildlife.
Great, thanks to both of you. Okay, so we have a next question from Phil McDonald. And he says, is there a monitoring and maintenance plan also developed for the project?
Yeah, not so much directly through my work, other than Marc-André, really, they're setting up that project, and that they're very good on that on all of their projects. So that will be part of their ongoing monitoring.
Yeah, if I can add, yeah, we've been doing some more systematic, like monitoring of the bobolinks, for example. We've monitored those for the last 2 years and had quite a bit of success, or the birds had quite a bit of success. We're also monitoring the leopard frogs, quite intensively through that general area, and finding them in a lot of the places that have been sort of improved. So, I mean, not to say that they weren't there before, but certainly they're a little bit maybe easier to see now. And so, yeah, we'll continue monitoring over time to see, especially changes in habitat. It's really sort of rich area, and vegetation sort of takes on quite quickly. And the Nature Conservancy of Canada has put quite an effort in planting vegetation along some of these drainage ditches. So I know they are monitoring the growth and also, sort of the impact of ungulates on some of that vegetation.
Great, thanks. Interesting question from Brian Gustafson. So would you consider introducing beavers into a project like this?
I'm going to turn that back to Marc-André.
Well, I think we probably won't have to introduce any, because there are plenty of beavers in the valley in that area. So I think they will probably just move in naturally, and hopefully, help in either like sort of stabilizing or improving some of the habitat in along those channels. There's always challenges with some of the drainage channel, because they are actually used for agriculture, and beavers are not always desired in that situation. But I mean, certainly where they can cohabit and live in there peacefully, yeah, they will definitely make an impact.
Great. Next question from Suzanne Bailey. Question I was curious about as well, actually. How did the master plan handle climate change and drought?
Well, specifically, do we look at climate change? We really are looking at how to improve those species habitat. And so we do affect climate change by making sure that the cottonwood forests that perhaps didn't get enough water before, now we've got water moving into it, that we're creating these buffers along drainage ditches and pollinators that will improve quality of crop as well as habitat. So I think any time that we look at these projects environmentally, we're addressing climate change. We're addressing that by just trying to improve the habitat, by trying to improve the movement of water that's existing. When we put in native plants, and especially native grasses, those root zones go 3-4 feet deep. And when we look at agricultural areas, those root zones they might be super shallow depending on the species. So by bringing plants back into those native corridors and native areas, I think it's a good thing. It affects all those species, and makes us more resilient for climate change.
And we have looked at the hydrology, especially in the duck-like nesting area, and it's part of the project in the prior year where we replaced the water control to be able to still move water into there. I mean, it's a highly modified system, so it's not as simple as I guess maybe if it was a more natural system, but we've tried to improve channelization and open it up a little bit better, so to retain more water and create more water features too, to you know, I guess address some of these climate change issues. But yeah, it's definitely easy to observe that things are changing, and we will, I'm sure, face, you know, drought conditions. Some of the ponds that were excavated on the Nature Conservancy of Canada, you know, are drying up probably a little bit faster than we would have liked. But one of the 3 ponds is retaining water. So, you know, and that's why we're trying different things to offer, you know, conditions that will sort of suit a variety of climate scenarios. But I mean, there's a lot more to do too.
Great, thanks for tackling that. So our next question comes from Don, and he says, is there Indigenous involvement?
I think, Marc-André, I'm going to turn that over to you also.
Yeah, we have had sort of discussion in site visits with members of the Yakanuki people in Creston here. They weren't necessarily directly involved in the construction activities, but we are always in touch with them and consulting them on some of the ideas and bouncing ideas back. They have in the Lower Kootenay band wetland, they have done a lot of work there too, to restore wetlands. So we kind of have been visiting their site and, you know, taking ideas from what they've been doing, and then kind of you know, exchanging expertise. And we're definitely continuing to do that with the project that we're developing on the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area.
Great, thanks, Marc-André. Okay, there's a question from Claudia with a nice comment. It says, thanks, Leslie, very inspirational and provides great experience to guide other efforts. I have a quick question on land protection with regards to trespass. How much of an issue is land trespass by hunters or recreational ATVs or other in your corridors?
Well, it kind of comes down to a little bit of my last slide, that there is a lot of people that enjoy this area and certainly use it throughout the year. And if we start to get some more signage up describing what the purposes of these corridors are, and asking people to, you know, stay in the people corridor and let's leave the wildlife buffers and wildlife corridors for the wildlife, I think that'll address a lot of it. Marc-André again knows probably how much of an issue it is, or if it's not an issue.
Yeah, it's luckily, I mean, we knock on wood, like we don't have, certainly in terms of ATVs, we don't have a big issue here. I mean, there's always the odd ones, you know, that'll go take a ride around. The biggest sort of challenge that we had in that area is we have a annual road closure for northern leopard frog migration, and so we have gates on the dike in 2 locations, and we've seen people kind of drive around the gates into the fields prior to some of the wetland creations that we did there. So we certainly tried to add some features that made it, you know, sort of more difficult to access with you know, 4x4 vehicles. And in terms of hunting, hunting is allowed on most of that area, on the management area. And I believe that the fields on the Frog Bear property, on the Nature Conservancy of Canada property, also kind of allows hunting there. So that's not as much of an issue. So I think overall, you know, it's generally good, which is kind of fortunate.
That's great news. Okay, there's a question from Laura. How did you manage such quick turnaround time on the permitting?
Yeah, we didn't have actually to get any permits, I think, for most of the work that we've done, because some of the work that we did was like in fields, like the excavation we did were in fields, so we weren't working in or around water. We did have some for the water control that we installed, the pump house demolished and installed a new water control. We have water licenses, so we did the work under our water licenses. And but otherwise, we have like permits for capturing leopard frogs, like species at risk permits. And yeah, I can't think of any other permits that were required at the time anyway, which helps a lot.
Huge help. Okay, Marc-André, this question is for you from Eva. How amenable are the farmers and other users, such as utility companies, to making these changes on the land?
Yeah, it's you know, kind of a variety of opinions about some of the work. I mean, some of the older sort of farmers in the valley thought, you know, removing some of the past, like the fields, you know, the crop fields, to turn them into wetland was kind of a waste. But the farmer that lives that sort of rents the land on the wildlife management area was you know, fairly agreeable to do some of this work. I mean, it often improves some of their crops by, you know, like, let's say, maintain water a little bit longer in some of these channels. It provides, you know, like a better water table for the plants to grow. And sometimes it does make it a little bit more difficult for them to get around with their machinery, but we try to take that into consideration when we design like some of our projects. And so overall, you know, I think it's fairly well received, but yeah, there are some people that don't necessarily agree with it. But you know, I think it's sort of the way it goes with some of these activities.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. We just have one question left, and which is great. We're nearing the end of our time. So this question comes from William. Is there a cultural burning or prescribed fire regimen plan for the area?
We've talked about that as part of the management especially in the bobolink area or areas of woody shrubs, that we want small patches of burning rather than large areas. And we'd want it to alternate what year each area gets burned. And really it's so that we're not both destroying, like the bobolinks, they don't like a lot of shrubby debris. So it's an advantage then to manage those upland areas to benefit that. We certainly know that upland grasses benefit to be both grazed and to be burned. So it's really the timing, setting the timing outside of the breeding areas. There's other areas that you know, the shrubs just get too decadent. They get too old and they're too woody, so that they don't really benefit a lot of species underneath. So if we can do some seasonal burning in some areas to benefit, I think that'll help improve the habitat tremendously.
Yeah, the area, like, we haven't really started to look into it just yet, but something that we've been thinking about, and there are definitely areas that could benefit from some burning. There are lots of sort of challenges that are associated with burning here in the Creston Valley, one being the smoke. But it's something that we'll definitely consider in the coming years.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So there's one question in the Q&A. I think if there's time, Leslie or Marc-André could circle back to that. I'm just going to close us off here as a group so that everyone can get on with their day. I want to start by saying thank you so much, Leslie, for taking us down to the site scale. It was really wonderful to start with Michael's really big picture talk and then come down, you know, to the ground to see how some of this work might actually unfold and provide us with some ideas and tools on how this might happen elsewhere. Also, Marc-André, thanks for joining in and answering the questions, because of course we should have planned this in advance and had you here already. So I'm glad it worked out well. I'm just going to move to my next slide here, and And say, of course, thanks again to all of our sponsors, without which this project wouldn't be possible. And to our next slide to entice you to come to our next talk. So we look forward to seeing you next week with Sarah Deslauriers, who'll be speaking on behalf of the Ktunaxa Nation Council on all living things, a cultural approach to reconcile First Nation stewardship rights with resource management. So that is promises to be a great conversation as well. So thanks everybody. If you have to go, please feel free to run. And Leslie, Marc-André, you might want to have a quick look at the chat there. There's a number of comments coming in for you there. And it looks like that last question in the Q&A is gone. So we can wrap up. Thanks everybody. I'm going to turn off our cameras and go. Oh, Marc-André, did you have a comment?
No, I did answer, I think the question that was in the chat there. So hopefully it satisfied the people who ask.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for doing
Thanks.
that.
Thank you, everybody, and especially Marc-André for just the support, everything on this project. It was super cool to be part of it.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Okay,
Have a
thanks
good day.
everybody.